This is Colin O'Keefe checking in with another episode of LXBN TV. Today's topic of conversation is the Sandra Fluke Rush Limbaugh story, and specifically how Fluke may have a defamation case on her hands against Limbaugh. My guest today is Max Kennerly, attorney with the Beasley firm in Philadelphia and author of the excellent Litigation and Trial. Max, for those who don't know, which may not be very many people at this point, what's the backstory here? What exactly happened?
Well, without getting too political about it, the House of Republicans held, or House of Congress held, hearings on contraceptives and the proposed mandate that all institutions cover contraceptives as part of their prescription drug plans, including religious entities. The House is controlled by Republicans, and it was criticized for not including any women in their discussion. So the Democrats held an external hearing, not actually within Congress, but similar, in which they invited a number of women, including Sandra Fluke, a law student at Georgetown. She gave what was, to me, not a very controversial statement. She just talked at length about how the lack of access to contraceptives at Georgetown Law had affected some of her friends there. She spoke about a friend who had polycystic ovarian syndrome and the difficulty that her friend had in having this condition diagnosed, how it was being treated. There was a couple interesting statistics about the number of women there who were quizzed after they had some sort of diagnosis like this. So Rush Limbaugh gets hold of this, and I think even he would agree, and a lot of his supporters would agree, that he went kind of off the deep end in the way he was talking about it. He referred to Sandra Fluke as a slut, as a prostitute. Now, in many ways it was hyperbole, but kind of getting to the legal issue for this of, given the way he said it and the context of it and what he was saying, there's more to it than simply the just side opinion that she is a slut or a prostitute.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And second, you addressed this in your post, but why do you believe Sandra Fluke may be able to sue Limbaugh for defamation or even intentional infliction of emotional distress?
Well, as a basic matter, as kind of everyone knows, under the First Amendment, you're entitled to whatever opinion you want. And there's that beautiful line from the Gertz opinion about how, there's no such thing as a pernicious opinion. And when the Supreme Court kind of got back to that issue in the Milkovich case in 1990, they quoted Judge Friendly saying that, well, look, in every defamation case now, people quote that there's no such thing as a pernicious idea, even when it's completely irrelevant. And in Milkovich, the Supreme Court upheld, an opinion isn't automatically protected. An opinion can still make you liable if your opinion includes embedded implications or statements of facts within it. I mean, merely saying, I think someone's a liar, well, the next question is, why? It's obviously you think you know some sort of fact about them. And when we look at what Rush Limbaugh said, just kind of quoting some of it, when he talked about her testimony, he said, she says she's having so much sex she can't afford the contraception. And, when we see the context in which he uses these hyperbolic statements like slut and prostitute, he's characterizing her testimony in front of the Democratic committee there, and he's doing it unfairly. Her actual testimony had nothing to do with her own sex life at all. It was simply references to other medical conditions that other women had. And so when you look at the whole picture of his statements, then you have, slut and prostitute, well, maybe that's protected opinion, but not when you put it in the context of this Georgetown law student went in front of Democratic members and told them she was having a lot of sex and that she couldn't afford her contraceptives because of how much sex she's having. Well, that puts everything in a completely different light. It's not as if he fairly characterized the testimony and says, well, in my opinion, it's kind of slutty to talk about this issue at all. Yeah. He might be okay then, but that raises a completely different issue, though, when he's talking about these factual issues, such as what her testimony actually was, and then you link that together with the statement, and suddenly it takes on a whole new realm to what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. It looked like it was going a little bit beyond his own personal opinions, or at least they can be conveyed to be more than his own personal opinions. So finally, are there relevant precedents in cases like this, and do they support potential claims by Fluke?
Well, it's interesting, actually, of the concept of defamation per se, the statements that are automatically defamatory whenever you see them. Classically, one of the four was questioning the chastity of a woman. Now, we're long past that stage where we have these types of stereotypical views of men and women, but at the same time, there's a fair amount of cases out there in which someone is referred to as being sexually promiscuous or is being referred to particularly as a prostitute, given that prostitution is a crime. Now, that statement might also have been hyperbolic. But the fact is, we actually have hundreds of years of law on this, and even some of the more recent cases, and some of them are referenced in my post. Mark Randazza, to his credit, even though he disagreed with them, put some of these in his own. There's been, past the year 2000, there have been successful defamation claims in which a court looked at this and said, well, calling someone sexually promiscuous can be defamatory given the context, and that's kind of an issue more for a jury to look at, as opposed to a court jumping in and saying, well, we know as a matter of law that this is not defamatory. I mean, I can guarantee you, by this point, Sandra Fluke, there are people out there who believe at a minimum that she told all these Democratic legislators, I'm having a lot of sex, I can't even afford my contraceptives, I want you to pay for it, because that's how Rush described her testimony. And, at least as I see that, would that lower her reputation in the community? I can see it certainly doing that. And I bet she's received emails, she's received phone calls. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about this in which people seem to believe not, necessarily the slut prostitute line, but they believe the way Rush Limbaugh characterized her testimony, which was false. So I think there's enough precedent out there describing these types of circumstances that she certainly could bring her claim. Now, will it win automatically? Of course not. But in terms of, is it the type of claim that has a good chance of getting to a jury? I think so.
Definitely, and I think you raised a great point there with the fact that because of this controversy, that's even taken it to a whole new level, because the fact is most people are hearing about Sandra Fluke coming through Rush Limbaugh's comments, so they're not hearing about what she originally testified to. All they're hearing about is what Rush said. So, it sounds like it is maybe a very worthwhile case.
It is, and just kind of the example that I always think of for a lot of these defamation cases, people say, well, her reputation in some ways is better because now she's seen as an activist on the pro-choice side, the contraceptive side. And the thing I always say to them is Richard Jewell. And when you hear Richard Jewell, you think, was that the Olympic Park bomber? Well, actually, no, not at all. But he was certainly accused of being the Olympic Park bomber, and that stayed with him for the rest of his entire life. So, this idea of, well, everyone kind of knows the story now, isn't necessarily true. I mean, news hounds who read political news all day, they know the story. But your typical person out there who's only kind of heard a little bit about it and then, years down the road, maybe encounters Sandra Fluke, well, what will they remember from that? They'll be like, oh, yeah, you're that girl who went in front of the Democrats and said you were having a lot of sex. And that was really weird when I heard about it. Yeah. Well, that's defamatory.
Exactly. I can only imagine her resume coming into, a large law firm with, an older person taking a look at that. You never know. Oh, I see this name. What's the first thing I think? Let me slide that under this other pile of resumes. So it's just something that can linger with her for a long time. Well, once again, that was Max Kennerly with the Beasley firm and the excellent Litigation and Trial. For more on this story, be sure to check out Max's post. It's at litigationandtrial.com. That's really one of the best publications on the LexBlog Network and one of the best law blogs out there. So be sure to visit that. And, of course, be sure to visit lxbn.lexblog.com. Thank you, Max.
Thank you, Colin.